Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. I asked the Ouija board about my future, and now I'm terrified. Alright, so this is a long one, and honestly, I just need to get it all out. Maybe it'll help, maybe it won't. But here we go. A couple of weeks ago, my girlfriend Emma and I were having one of those nights where you just want to do something different. We'd already burned through all the good stuff on Netflix, and the bars were just too loud and crowded. So Emma suggested we do something spooky. She's always been into the paranormal and I've always been a skeptic. Perfect match, right? She pulled out this old, worn-out Ouija board that she'd found at a yard sale a few years ago. It looked ancient, with the wood all scratched up and the letters barely visible. But it was legit, and Emma swore it had some energy. I laughed it off, but hey, I was game. We set it up in the living room, dimmed the lights, and lit a couple of candles. Classic horror movie setup. We started with the usual questions. Is anyone here? What's your name? You know, the typical stuff. The planchette moved, but I figured Emma was just messing with me. She always had a mischievous side. Then I thought, why not ask something more personal? Something Emma wouldn't know. So I asked, what's my future like? The planchette started moving slowly, almost reluctantly. It spelled out one word, D-E-A-T-H. I laughed, but Emma looked genuinely freaked out. Maybe we should stop, she said, but now my curiosity was piqued. I had to know more. So I asked, how will I die? The planchette hesitated again before spelling out H-O-R-R-I-B-L-E-P-A-I-N. Now I was the one getting creeped out. Emma insisted we put the board away, but I felt this weird, morbid curiosity, like I needed to know more. So I asked one last question. When will it happen? This time, the planchette moved so fast it nearly flew off the board. It spelled out T-O-N-I-G-H-T. Emma screamed and jumped up, knocking the board off the table. The candles flickered out, and we were plunged into darkness. My heart was pounding, but I tried to play it cool. It's just a game, I said, trying to calm her down. But deep inside, I felt this cold, creeping dread. We went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every noise, every shadow seemed like a threat. Around 3 a.m., I heard this weird scratching sound coming from the living room. Emma was fast asleep, so I grabbed a flashlight and went to check it out. The Ouija board was back on the table, planchette in the center. I knew we'd put it away. I was sure of it. I felt this chill run down my spine, but I forced myself to approach the board. The air around it felt heavy, almost suffocating. I reached out to touch the planchette, and as soon as my fingers made contact, the flashlight flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness, and that's when I heard it, this low, guttural whisper, right in my ear. It said my name, not just said it, but hissed it, like it was savoring the sound. I stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table, and fell hard on my back. When I scrambled to my feet and turned the flashlight back on, the board was gone. Just gone. I searched the entire living room, but it was like it had never been there. I woke Emma up, but she just thought I was dreaming or something. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day at work, I was a mess. Couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that word, death. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just a stupid game, but something felt wrong, really wrong. That night, Emma went out with some friends, so I was home alone. I tried to distract myself with TV, video games, anything. But I kept hearing these noises. Footsteps, whispers, things moving in the shadows. I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but it didn't make it any less terrifying. Around midnight, the power went out. I grabbed my phone for a flashlight and made my way to the breaker box in the basement. As soon as I opened the door, I was hit with this overwhelming stench. Rotting meat, sewage, something else I couldn't quite place. I gagged, covering my nose and mouth, and forced myself to go down. The basement was pitch black, and my phone's flashlight barely cut through the darkness. I made it to the breaker box and flipped the switch, but nothing happened. That's when I saw it. In the far corner, something was moving. At first, I thought it was a rat or something, but then it stood up. It was tall, impossibly thin, with long, bony fingers that almost touched the floor. Its eyes were two burning coals in its skull-like face, and its mouth was this wide, gaping hole filled with sharp, jagged teeth. It smiled at me, and I felt this wave of pure, unadulterated terror. I stumbled back, dropping my phone, and scrambled up the stairs. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I could hear it down there, scratching at the door, whispering my name. I grabbed a kitchen knife and sat in the corner of the living room, staring at the basement door. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I blinked, I saw that thing's face grinning at me. Emma came home early in the morning and found me like that. She freaked out, thinking I'd lost my mind. I tried to explain, but it all sounded so insane. She made me go to the doctor, who said I was just stressed and prescribed some sleeping pills. But I know what I saw, and I know it's still down there, waiting for me. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. I feel it getting closer, feel its eyes on me. If you're reading this, please don't mess with Ouija boards. It's not a game, it's real, and it's waiting for you too. Things got worse after that night. Emma tried to be supportive, but she was clearly freaked out by how on edge I was. I couldn't blame her. I was a wreck, jumping at every little noise, seeing things out of the corner of my eye. The sleeping pills the doctor gave me didn't help much. They just made me groggy and more paranoid. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the house with us. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the shadows, hear faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Emma insisted it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. One night, about a week after the Ouija board incident, Emma and I were watching a movie in the living room. I was trying to focus, but I kept feeling like we were being watched. Suddenly, the TV flickered and went off, plunging the room into darkness. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us. "Great! Another power outage," Emma said, reaching for her phone. But this time, it wasn't just the power. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath in the air. I grabbed Emma's hand, trying to stay calm. "It's here," I whispered, my voice shaking. Emma looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean? What's here?" Before I could answer, we heard it. That same low guttural whisper, echoing through the room. It sounded like it was coming from all around us, getting louder and more menacing. "Leave us alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. But the whispering didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like it was right in our ears. Then we saw it, the figure from the basement standing in the doorway. It was even more horrifying in the dim light, its eyes burning with a malevolent fire. It grinned at us, revealing those sharp, jagged teeth. Emma screamed and clung to me, tears streaming down her face. "What is that thing?" she sobbed. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But it's not human." The figure took a step forward, its long fingers reaching out toward us. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like my soul was being pulled out of my body. I knew we had to get out of there. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Emma to her feet. We bolted for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it was glued shut. I pounded on it, desperation clawing at my chest. "Let us out!" The whispering grew louder, filling my head with this unbearable noise. I felt like I was going insane. Emma was screaming, trying to pry the door open. but it was no use. Then, everything went silent. The temperature rose back to normal, and the figure was gone. The lights flickered back on, and the door suddenly opened. We stumbled outside, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding in our chests. We got in the car and drove to a hotel, neither of us saying a word. I could see the terror in Emma's eyes, and I knew she saw the same in mine. We spent the night huddled together, jumping at every little sound. I didn't sleep at all, and I don't think Emma did either. The next morning, we decided to go back to the house, hoping it had all just been a bad dream. But as soon as we walked through the door, I knew it wasn't over. The air was thick with that same oppressive feeling, and I could sense the presence lurking in the shadows. Emma and I sat down in the kitchen, trying to figure out what to do. "We need to get rid of that board," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, but I had no idea how to do it. I didn't want to touch it again, but I knew we had to do something. I called a friend of mine, Mark, who was into all that paranormal stuff. He agreed to come over and help us out. When Mark arrived, he brought a bunch of sage and some other things he said would help cleanse the house. We found the Ouija board in the basement, right where I'd seen that thing. Just looking at it made my skin crawl. Mark started burning the sage, chanting something under his breath. The smoke filled the room, and for a moment it felt like things were getting better. But then, the whispering started again. Louder this time, more insistent. Mark's face went pale, and he looked at me with wide eyes. "This isn't good," he said. "This thing is strong." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and spun around, but there was nothing there. The room seemed to darken, the shadows closing in on us. The temperature dropped again, and I could see my breath. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, his voice shaking. "Now!" We bolted for the stairs, but halfway up, something grabbed my ankle. I fell, hitting the ground hard. I looked down and saw a hand, bony and rotting, gripping my leg. I kicked at it, trying to break free, but it held on tight. Emma screamed and grabbed my arms, trying to pull me up. Mark joined in, and together they managed to drag me up the stairs. The hand let go, and I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for breath. Mark looked at me, his face pale. "We need professional help," he said. "This is beyond anything I've dealt with." We drove to a nearby church, hoping to find a priest or someone who could help us. When we explained what was happening, the priest looked at us with a mixture of fear and concern. He agreed to come to the house and perform an exorcism. The drive back was tense, none of us speaking. When we arrived, the house seemed darker, more foreboding. The priest began his rituals, chanting and sprinkling holy water around the house. At first it seemed to be working. The air felt lighter, the oppressive feeling lifting. But then the whispers returned, louder and more angry. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing. The priest's voice wavered, but he continued the exorcism. I saw the figure again, standing in the corner, its eyes burning with rage. It lunged at the priest, knocking him to the ground. The room erupted into chaos, the lights flickering, the walls shaking. Emma screamed, and I grabbed her, trying to protect her. Mark was shouting something, but his words were lost in the noise. The figure loomed over us, its mouth opening wide, revealing those sharp, jagged teeth. Then, everything went black. When I came to, we were outside, the priest standing over us. He looked exhausted, but relieved. "It's over," he said, his voice weak. "For now." We didn't go back into the house. We packed our things and left, moving in with Emma's parents until we could figure out what to do. The house was still there, a dark reminder of the nightmare we'd endured. I don't know if it's truly over. I still hear whispers at night, see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye. Emma is trying to be strong, but I can see the fear in her eyes. We don't talk about what happened, but we both know it's not over. The thing that came through the Ouija board is still out there, waiting, and I know it's only a matter of time before it comes for me again. Living with Emma's parents was supposed to be a temporary solution, but it turned into a long-term stay as we tried to figure out what to do next. Her parents were understanding, but they didn't fully grasp the terror we'd experienced. They thought we were just traumatized by some overactive imaginations. We didn't try to convince them otherwise. It was easier that way. For the first few days, things were almost normal. We started to feel a bit safer, a bit more like ourselves. But deep down, I knew it was just a matter of time before whatever it was found us again. One night, about a week after we'd moved in, I woke up to the sound of whispering. My heart raced as I strained to hear it, praying I was just dreaming. But the whispers were real, faint but unmistakable. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I nudged Emma awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She listened for a moment, her eyes widening. "Oh God, it's here," she said, her voice trembling. We crept out of bed and headed downstairs, trying not to wake her parents. The whispers grew louder as we approached the living room. The air felt cold and heavy, just like in our house. My stomach churned with dread. In the living room, the shadows seemed to pulse and writhe. We saw the figure standing in the corner, its eyes burning with that same malevolent fire. It grinned at us, and I felt that same wave of terror wash over me. Emma's parents had a small crucifix hanging on the wall. I grabbed it, hoping it would do something, anything. "Leave us alone," I shouted, holding the crucifix out in front of me. The figure hissed, and the room seemed to grow darker. The whispers turned into a low, guttural growl. Emma clung to me, sobbing. "Make it stop, please," she begged. I didn't know what else to do. I started chanting a prayer, one I barely remembered from childhood. The figure stepped closer, its grin widening. I felt like I was losing my mind, like my very soul was being sucked out of me. Suddenly, the room filled with a blinding light. The figure recoiled, hissing in pain. Emma's parents had woken up and turned on every light in the house. The figure disappeared, and the oppressive feeling lifted. Emma's parents were terrified, but tried to comfort us. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could see the fear in our eyes. We spent the rest of the night huddled together in the living room, the lights on, praying it wouldn't come back. The next day, we called the priest again. He agreed to come over and bless the house. He performed the rituals, chanting and sprinkling holy water in every room. The air felt lighter afterward, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. That night, we all slept in the living room again. The whispers didn't return, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure grinning at me. I knew it was only a matter of time before it came back. Over the next few days, we tried to carry on with our lives, but the fear was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Emma's parents were kind and supportive, but they couldn't understand the terror we were living with. We didn't want to burden them with our fears, so we kept to ourselves as much as possible. Then, one night, things took a turn for the worse. We were sitting in the living room, trying to watch a movie and forget about everything. The lights started flickering, and the temperature dropped. We knew what was coming. The whispers returned, louder this time, more insistent. The shadows in the room seemed to grow and twist, forming that familiar, horrifying shape. The figure stood in the corner, its eyes burning with hatred. Emma's parents were frozen with fear, staring at the figure. I grabbed the crucifix again, but this time, it didn't seem to have any effect. The figure stepped closer, its grin widening. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like my very soul was being pulled out of my body. Emma was sobbing, clinging to me, and I knew we couldn't stay there. We had to leave, but I didn't know where to go. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice shaking. "Leave us alone!" The figure hissed, and the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The room seemed to darken, the shadows closing in on us. I felt like I was going insane, like I was losing my grip on reality. Then, I remembered something. Mark had mentioned a place, a man who specialized in dealing with this kind of thing. I grabbed my phone and called him, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. "Mark, it's back," I said, my voice trembling. "We need help, now." Mark sounded concerned but determined. "I know someone who can help," he said. "Get to the address I'm sending you. He's an expert in this kind of thing." I hung up and told Emma and her parents we had to leave. They didn't argue, just grabbed their coats and followed me out the door. The whispers followed us, growing louder as we drove away. I could feel the figure's eyes on us, like it was right there, just out of sight. We arrived at the address Mark had given us. It was an old, run-down house on the edge of town. A man in his 50s answered the door, his eyes serious and full of understanding. "I'm Richard," he said. "Mark told me what's happening. Come in." We followed him inside, and he led us to a small room filled with strange artifacts and books. He listened as we explained everything, nodding occasionally. When we finished, he took a deep breath. "This entity is powerful," he said. "It's not just a ghost or a demon. It's something much older, much darker. It's attached itself to you, and it won't stop until it gets what it wants." "What does it want?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Richard looked at us, his expression grim. "It wants your soul. It feeds on fear and despair. It's been growing stronger with each encounter." My heart sank. "What can we do?" Richard stood up and began gathering some items from around the room. "We need to perform a ritual to sever its connection to you. It's dangerous, but it's the only way. We need to do it tonight, before it gets any stronger." We agreed, and Richard began preparing for the ritual. He explained what we needed to do, and we followed his instructions carefully. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew tense, the air heavy with anticipation. Finally, everything was ready. We stood in a circle, holding hands, as Richard began chanting in a language I didn't understand. The room seemed to darken, and the temperature dropped. I could feel the entity's presence watching us, waiting. The shadows in the room began to twist and writhe, forming that familiar, horrifying shape. The figure stood before us, its eyes burning with rage. Richard continued chanting, his voice growing louder and more insistent. The figure lunged at us, but an invisible barrier seemed to hold it back. It hissed and snarled, its eyes filled with hatred. Richard's chanting reached a fever pitch, and I felt a surge of energy like a wave crashing over me. The figure screamed, a sound so piercing and otherworldly it made my ears ring. The shadows writhed and twisted, and then, suddenly, it was gone. The room lightened, the oppressive feeling lifting. Richard lowered his hands, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "It's done," he said, his voice weak. "The connection is severed." We collapsed, exhausted but relieved. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we were finally free. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The entity was gone for now, but I could still feel its presence lurking in the shadows, waiting. It was only a matter of time before it found us again. And next time, we might not be so lucky. We left Richard's house feeling a mix of relief and dread. While the ritual seemed to have worked, there was still this lingering sense of unease. It felt like we had only bought ourselves some time, a temporary reprieve from the nightmare that had taken over our lives. Back at Emma's parents' house, we tried to resume some semblance of normalcy, but the fear never really went away. Every night I lay awake, listening for the whispers, watching for the shadows. Emma tried to be strong, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. She barely ate, barely slept. Her parents were worried, but they didn't know the full extent of what we had been through. A few nights later, I woke up to a familiar, bone-chilling cold. My breath misted in the air, and I knew it was back. I sat up in bed, straining to hear anything out of the ordinary. At first, there was nothing, just the oppressive silence. Then, the whispers started again, faint and distant, but unmistakable. I shook Emma awake. "It's here," I whispered. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. We had done everything we could think of. The priest, the exorcism, Richard's ritual. Nothing had worked. This thing was relentless. We crept out of the bedroom, trying not to wake her parents. As we made our way down the hallway, the temperature dropped even further. I could see shadows moving, twisting in ways that made my skin crawl. We reached the living room, and there it was, The figure stood in the center of the room, its eyes burning with that familiar malevolent fire. It didn't grin this time. It just stared at us, its mouth a gaping void. I held Emma close, trying to shield her from the sight. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the cold, silent house. The figure didn't respond. It just stared, its eyes boring into my soul. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like my very essence was being pulled apart. Then, Emma's parents appeared at the top of the stairs. "What's going on?" her father shouted, his voice filled with confusion and fear. The figure turned its gaze toward them, and the temperature dropped even further. Emma's mother screamed, clutching her chest. Her father tried to move toward us, but the air seemed to thicken, like some invisible force was holding him back. "Leave them alone!" I shouted, stepping between the figure and Emma's parents. "It's me you want!" The figure grinned then, a slow, deliberate smile that sent shivers down my spine. It stepped closer, and I felt this wave of terror wash over me. I could barely breathe, barely think. "Do something!" Emma cried, her voice breaking. I didn't know what to do. I was out of ideas, out of hope. But then, something in me snapped. This thing had taken enough from us. I wasn't going to let it win. I grabbed the crucifix from the wall and held it out in front of me. "In the name of everything holy, I command you to leave," I shouted, my voice shaking but resolute. The figure hissed, recoiling slightly. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. But I didn't back down. I took a step forward, then another, forcing the figure back. "Leave us alone!" I shouted again, my voice gaining strength. "You have no power here!" The figure's eyes blazed with fury, but it continued to retreat. The whispers turned into a roar, filling my head with noise. I felt like my skull was going to explode, but I kept going. Finally, with one last ear-piercing shriek, the figure disappeared. The temperature in the room began to rise, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The whispers faded into silence. We stood there, panting and shaking, not quite believing it was over. Emma's parents rushed down the stairs, their faces pale with fear and confusion. "What the hell was that?" her father demanded, looking between us and the now empty room. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we needed to get out of there. "We have to leave," I said, my voice trembling. "It's not safe here." We packed our things and drove to a motel on the outskirts of town. Emma's parents were still in shock, but they trusted us enough to follow without question, or we huddled together in the small, dingy room, too scared to sleep. Over the next few days, we tried to piece our lives back together. We talked to more experts, more priests, anyone who might have answers, but no one could explain what was happening or how to stop it. The whispers came back, of course. They always did. But now they were different, more insistent, more desperate. It was like the entity knew it was losing its grip and was trying everything it could to hold on. One night, I had a dream. Or at least, I thought it was a dream. I was standing in the living room of our old house, the Ouija board in front of me. The planchette moved on its own, spelling out a message. FACEYOURFEARS. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. I didn't know what it meant, but I had a feeling it was important. I told Emma about it, and she agreed. We had to go back. We had to confront whatever this thing was, once and for all. We returned to the house with a sense of dread, but also determination. We were tired of running, tired of being scared. It was time to end this. We set up the Ouija board in the living room, just like before. The air was thick with tension, but we held on to each other, drawing strength from our shared fear. "Is anyone here?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. The planchette moved, spelling out YES. "What do you want?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. The planchette moved again, faster this time. FEAR. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "We're not afraid of you," I said, hoping it was true. The planchette moved violently, spelling out LIARS. The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing. "We're not afraid," I repeated. my voice shaking but determined. "You have no power over us." The planchette stopped moving, and the room grew silent. The oppressive feeling began to lift, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The entity was losing its grip. It fed on fear, and without it, it had no power. We held on to each other, our fear turning into resolve. We weren't going to let it control us anymore. The next few days were tense but hopeful. The whispers grew fainter, the shadows less menacing. It was still there, lurking, but its power was waning. We continued to face our fears, refusing to let the entity control us. It was a long, hard battle, but we were determined to win. And slowly but surely, we began to reclaim our lives. The entity's presence grew weaker, and the whispers eventually stopped. The shadows in our house returned to normal, and the oppressive feeling lifted for good. We never forgot what happened, but we refused to let it define us. We had faced our fears and come out stronger. And in the end, that was what saved us. But deep down, I knew we had only bought ourselves time. The entity was still out there, somewhere, waiting, and I knew it would be back. But when it did, we would be ready. Months passed, and life slowly started to return to a semblance of normalcy. Emma and I moved into a new apartment, far away from our old neighborhood. Her parents were supportive, helping us every step of the way. The whispers had stopped, and the shadows no longer held the same malevolent presence. We began to hope that maybe, just maybe, we had left it all behind. But deep down, I knew better. I felt it in the back of my mind, a constant, gnawing fear that the entity was still out there, biding its time. And then, one night, it came back. Emma and I were celebrating our 6-month anniversary in our new place. We had ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and were just starting to relax. We laughed, we talked, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we felt genuinely happy. Then, the lights flickered. The temperature in the room dropped, and I could see my breath in the air. Emma looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "No," she whispered. "Not again." The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. The shadows in the room began to twist and writhe, forming that familiar, horrifying shape. The figure stood before us, its eyes burning with rage, its grin wider and more menacing. I grabbed Emma's hand, squeezing it tightly. "We have to face it," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "We can't run anymore." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What do we do?" I didn't have a plan, but I knew we had to confront it head on. We couldn't let it control us with fear any longer. We stood together, facing the entity, our hands clasped tightly. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the cold, silent room. The figure didn't respond. It just stared at us, its eyes filled with hatred. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The room seemed to darken, the shadows closing in on us. "We're not afraid of you," I shouted again, trying to sound brave. "You have no power over us," the figure hissed, its eyes blazing with fury. It stepped closer, its long, bony fingers reaching out toward us. I felt a wave of terror wash over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You feed on fear," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "But we won't give you that. We're not afraid." The figure recoiled slightly, its eyes narrowing. The whispers grew more frantic, more desperate. I could feel its power waning, its hold on us weakening. "We are not afraid," Emma repeated, her voice strong. "You have no power here," the figure screamed, a sound so piercing and otherworldly it made my ears ring. The shadows twisted and writhed, and then suddenly, it was gone. The room lightened, the oppressive feeling lifting. We stood there, panting and shaking, not quite believing it was over. The temperature in the room began to rise and the whispers faded into silence. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The entity was gone, and its hold on us was broken. We had faced our fears and won. The next few days were a blur of relief and exhaustion. We talked to more experts, more priests, anyone who might have answers. They all said the same thing. The entity had been defeated. It fed on fear, and without it, it had no power. We spent the next few weeks reclaiming our lives, Rebuilding what had been broken, Emma and I grew closer, our bond stronger than ever. We knew we had faced something truly evil, and we had come out the other side. But deep down, I knew we had only bought ourselves time. The entity was still out there, somewhere, waiting, and I knew it would be back. But when it did, we would be ready. Years passed, and life continued. We got married, bought a house, started a family. The fear never fully went away, but we learned to live with it. We kept our guard up, always vigilant, always ready. And then, one night, it happened. I woke up to a familiar, bone-chilling cold. The whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. The shadows in the room began to twist and writhe, forming that familiar, horrifying shape. The figure stood before me, its eyes burning with rage, its grin wider and more menacing. But this time, I was ready. I stood up, facing the entity head on. "You have no power over us," I said, my voice steady and strong. "We're not afraid." The figure hissed, recoiling slightly. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, but I didn't back down. "We're not afraid," I repeated, my voice filled with determination. "You can't control us." The figure screamed, a sound so piercing and otherworldly it made my ears ring. The shadows twisted and writhed, and then suddenly it was gone. The room lightened, the oppressive feeling lifting. I stood there, panting and shaking, not quite believing it was over. The temperature in the room began to rise, and the whispers faded into silence. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The entity was gone, and its hold on us was broken. We had faced our fears and won. The next few days were a blur of relief and exhaustion. We talked to more experts, more priests, anyone who might have answers. They all said the same thing. The entity had been defeated. It fed on fear, and without it, it had no power. We spent the next few weeks reclaiming our lives, rebuilding what had been broken. Emma and I grew closer, our bond stronger than ever. We knew we had faced something truly evil, and we had come out the other side. But deep down, I knew we had only bought ourselves time. The entity was still out there somewhere, waiting, and I knew it would be back. But when it did, we would be ready. I didn't believe in spirits until the Ouija board proved me wrong. All right, so I need to get this off my chest. I never believed in spirits or ghosts or any of that paranormal stuff. Thought it was all bullshit, you know. But man, something happened to me recently that's messed with my head so bad, I can't shake it. I need to tell someone, anyone. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it. Here goes. It started on a Friday night. My buddies and I were hanging out at Jason's place. We were bored out of our minds, so we decided to mess around with his old Ouija board. Yeah, I know, it's stupid. But we were drunk and looking for a laugh. Jason swore up and down that the board had real power because it belonged to his grandma or some shit. We all called bullshit, but we figured, why not? It was just a game. So there we were, a bunch of idiots in a dark room, candles lit for ambiance, fingers on the planchette, trying not to laugh. It started out the usual way. "Is anyone there? What is your name?" Nothing happened for the longest time, and we were about to call it quits when the planchette moved. I swear, none of us were pushing it. It slid over to yes. We all froze, then burst out laughing. "Who's messing with it?" I asked. No one fessed up. Then it spelled out a name, A-L-I-C-E. Jason's face went white. "That's my grandma's name," he said. We thought he was messing with us, but he looked genuinely freaked out. We started asking questions, and the planchette moved faster. It spelled out things that only Jason's grandma could have known. I was still skeptical, but there was a weird vibe in the room, like the temperature dropped or something. I don't know how to explain it. After a while, we started getting bored again. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I asked the board, Can you show us a sign you're real? The planchette zipped to yes. Then it spelled out BATHROOM. We all looked at each other, nervous laughter bubbling up. All right, let's check it out, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We got up and walked to the bathroom down the hall. When we opened the door, the stench hit us like a wall. It was putrid, like rotting meat and sewage. Jason flicked on the light, and we saw it, written in what looked like blood on the mirror. Get out! I don't know how the hell it happened, but we were all scared shitless. We bolted out of there, leaving the Ouija board behind. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that message on the mirror. The next day, Jason called me, his voice shaking. Dude, we need to go back, he said. We need to say goodbye to whatever that was. I didn't want to, but he convinced me. It's just a game, I kept telling myself. When we got back to his place, the board was right where we left it. We sat down, fingers on the planchette, and I said, goodbye. But the planchette didn't move. Instead, it started to spell something else. Stay. Jason tried again. Goodbye, he said, his voice trembling. The planchette shot to no. That's when we heard it. A scratching noise coming from the bathroom. It was faint at first, but it got louder and louder, like nails on a chalkboard. We just sat there, frozen, until Jason mustered up the courage to go check it out. I followed, my heart pounding. The bathroom door was closed, but the scratching was deafening now. Jason reached for the knob, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, darker than anything I've ever seen, darted across the crack under the door. Jason yanked the door open, and the noise stopped. The bathroom was empty, but the message on the mirror was smeared, like someone had tried to wipe it away. The smell was gone too. We stood there, shaking, not knowing what to do. Jason looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. We need to burn it, he said. So that's what we did. We took the board outside, doused it in lighter fluid, and set it on fire. As the flames consumed it, I swear I heard a scream. Not like a human scream, more like a high-pitched wail, almost inhuman. It echoed in my ears, even after the board was nothing but ashes. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. That night, I had the most vivid nightmare. I was back in Jason's bathroom, staring at the mirror. The message was there again, but this time it said, "You're next." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I haven't been the same since. I keep seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows that disappear when I turn to look. I hear whispers at night, just on the edge of my hearing. I feel like I'm being watched all the time. This is just the beginning of my story, and honestly, I'm terrified to see how it ends. I've tried to tell myself it's all in my head, but deep down, I know it's not. Something followed me from that night, and it's not going away. I'll post more updates as they happen, but for now, I need to try and get some sleep. If you ever think about messing with a Ouija board, take it from me. Don't. You never know what you might unleash. So I promised I'd update, and things have only gotten worse. After that night, I thought maybe I could just forget about it. I hoped whatever it was would just leave me alone if I ignored it. But no, that's not how it works. Not at all. The first thing I noticed was the shadows. At first, it was just a flicker out of the corner of my eye. I'd turn and nothing would be there. I figured I was just paranoid. But then they started to get more obvious. I'd see a dark shape standing in the hallway or peeking around corners. Every time I looked directly at it, it would vanish. It wasn't just me either. My girlfriend, Emily, started noticing things too. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, shaking me, saying she heard someone whispering. I'd lie there, straining to hear, but all I'd catch was the faintest rustle, like someone brushing past the curtains. One night, Emily woke up screaming. She said she saw a man standing at the foot of our bed, just staring at her. I turned on the light, but there was no one there. She was so freaked out, she refused to sleep in the bedroom for a week. She made me set up a mattress in the living room, where she could see all the exits. We started fighting. I tried to tell her it was all in her head, that we were just scaring ourselves, but she didn't believe me. "You brought this into our house," she said. "You and your stupid friends with that Ouija board." I felt terrible. She wasn't wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I started researching online, looking for ways to get rid of spirits or whatever the hell this thing was. I tried smudging with sage, sprinkling salt around the doors and windows, even praying, though I'm not religious. Nothing worked. Then came the night I'll never forget. Emily had finally agreed to sleep in the bedroom again. We were both exhausted, just hoping for one peaceful night. Around 3 a.m, I woke up with a start. The room was freezing. I could see my breath in the air. I reached over to wake Emily, but she wasn't there. I sat up, heart pounding, and that's when I saw him. A man, if you can call him that, was standing in the corner of the room. He was tall and impossibly thin, with long arms that almost reached the floor. His skin was ashen, stretched tight over his bones, and his eyes, God, his eyes were just black holes. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed, unable to move or look away. He started to smile, and it was the most horrific thing I've ever seen. His mouth stretched wide, too wide, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. He raised one long, bony finger to his lips, as if telling me to be quiet. And then he was gone, just vanished. I could move again, and I scrambled out of bed, calling for Emily. I found her in the living room, huddled on the couch, eyes wide with terror. "He was here," she whispered. "He was standing right next to me." We left the house that night and went to a motel. Emily refused to go back. I had to go back alone to pack our things. Every moment I was there, I felt like I was being watched. I heard whispers, felt cold spots, saw those damn shadows everywhere. We moved in with my parents temporarily. Emily and I barely talk now. She's been staying with friends more and more. I can't blame her. I brought this on us. I don't know how to fix it. I'm writing this from my parents' basement. I don't want to scare them, but I think it's followed me here. Last night, I saw the shadow man again. He was standing at the foot of my bed, just staring. I don't know how to get rid of him. I'm scared all the time. I can't sleep. I can't think straight. Please, if anyone has any advice, I'm desperate. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I've got another update. I'm starting to think there's no way out of this. Things have gotten even darker since my last post, and I'm honestly scared for my life. After seeing the little girl in the basement, I tried everything to keep myself sane. I stayed away from the house as much as possible, slept during the day, and only went back at night when I was too exhausted to stay awake. But it didn't help. The nightmares followed me everywhere. I started to see her during the day too. I'd be at work, trying to focus, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see her standing in the hallway, watching me. I'd blink, and she'd be gone. My co-workers noticed I was acting weird, but what could I tell them? That I was being haunted by a dead girl and a shadow man. They'd think I was nuts. Emily finally came over one night. She'd been staying with friends, but she wanted to talk. She said she missed me and was worried about me. I didn't want to drag her back into this, but I was desperate for any kind of normalcy. We sat in the kitchen, trying to talk things out, when the lights flickered again. Emily tensed up. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound calm. "It's been happening a lot lately." We both knew what it meant. The temperature dropped, and that familiar scratching noise started up again. Emily's eyes widened and she grabbed my hand. "We need to leave," she whispered. But it was too late. The scratching grew louder, coming from all directions. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and twist. forming shapes that weren't there before. And then she appeared. The little girl, standing in the doorway, her empty eyes fixed on us. "Come play with me," she said, her voice echoing around the room. Emily screamed, and we both bolted for the front door. We made it outside, but I could still feel her presence like a cold hand gripping my heart. We drove to Emily's friend's place and stayed there for the night. Neither of us slept. Emily kept crying, saying she saw the shadow man standing outside the window, just watching. I tried to comfort her, but I was falling apart myself. The next day, I decided to go back to Jason. I needed answers. Maybe there was something he knew that could help. When I got to his place, he looked worse than I felt. Dark circles under his eyes, shaking hands, the whole deal. "It's been happening to me too," he said before I could even ask. "I've been seeing things, hearing things. I can't take it anymore, man." We talked for hours, trying to piece together what had happened that night with the Ouija board. Jason remembered something his grandma used to say. "If you call the spirits, you have to send them back. If you don't, they'll never leave." We realized we'd never properly closed the session. We'd burned the board, but we hadn't said goodbye. Jason said we needed to find a way to contact the spirits and tell them to leave. It sounded insane, but at this point I was willing to try anything. We bought a new Ouija board and set it up in Jason's basement. Emily refused to come, and I couldn't blame her. Jason and I sat down, fingers on the planchette, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Is anyone there?" Jason asked. The planchette moved to yes almost immediately. I felt a knot in my stomach. "Who are you?" I asked. It spelled out ALICE. Jason's face went pale. "Grandma," he whispered. The planchette moved to yes again. "We need to say goodbye," I said, my voice shaking. "We're sorry we didn't do it properly before. Please, let us say goodbye." The planchette didn't move. Instead, the temperature in the room dropped even more, and I saw my breath in the air. The shadows around us seemed to thicken, closing in. "Please," Jason begged. "We're sorry. Let us go." The planchette shot to no, and the lights went out. I heard a low, guttural growl, and the little girl's voice echoed around the room. "You can't leave. You called us. Now you're ours." I felt something cold and slimy wrap around my ankle and screamed. Jason yanked me away, and we bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind us. We could still hear the scratching, the whispers, even from outside. We've been staying in motels ever since, moving from place to place. Emily won't talk to me. My parents think I've lost my mind. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I can. Every night I see them. The shadow man, the little girl. They're always there, watching, waiting. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I can't eat, can't sleep, can't think straight. I don't know how much more I can take. If anyone has any advice, please, I'm begging you. I don't know how to get rid of this thing. I just want my life back. I promised an update, and I wish I had better news. Things have gone from bad to worse. I'm at the end of my rope here. I don't know what to do anymore, and I'm starting to lose hope. After the disaster with the Ouija board at Jason's place, we were more terrified than ever. We couldn't stay in one place for too long because the presence followed us everywhere. Emily broke up with me. She couldn't handle it anymore. I don't blame her. She said she loved me, but she couldn't live in constant fear. I haven't seen her since. Jason and I decided we needed help. Real help. We found a psychic medium online who claimed to have experience with malevolent spirits. We were desperate, so we set up a meeting. Her name was Lorraine, and she lived about an hour away. When we arrived at her house, Lorraine seemed to know what we were dealing with before we even explained. "You've awakened something very old and very angry," she said. "It's feeding off your fear." She told us we needed to perform a ritual to send the spirits back. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't without risk, but it was our only shot. She gave us a list of items we'd need: black candles, salt, sage, a silver knife, and a mirror. We gathered everything and went back to Jason's place. Lorraine came with us, insisting it had to be done where it all started. I didn't want to go back there, but I knew we had no choice. The moment we stepped into the house, The air felt thick, like walking through molasses. The temperature dropped, and that familiar stench of decay hit us. Lorraine set up the candles in a circle and sprinkled the salt around us. She lit the sage and began chanting in a language I didn't understand. Jason and I stood inside the circle, holding the mirror and the silver knife. "Whatever you do, do not leave the circle," Lorraine warned. "No matter what you see or hear, you must stay inside." The chanting grew louder, and the shadows around us seemed to come alive. I saw shapes moving in the darkness, shifting and writhing. The scratching noise started again, louder and more frantic. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the little girl. She was standing just outside the circle, her empty eyes fixed on me. "Come play with me," she whispered, her voice echoing in my head. I gripped Jason's arm, trying to keep myself grounded. Lorraine's chanting reached a fever pitch, and the shadows began to coalesce into the form of the Shadow Man. He towered over us, his eyes two empty pits of darkness. He didn't move, just stood there, watching. The little girl took a step closer, her hand outstretched. "Hold the mirror up," Lorraine shouted over the noise. "Reflect their image back at them." Jason and I held up the mirror, aiming it at the Shadow Man and the little girl. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mirror began to shake, vibrating in our hands. The shadows seemed to recoil from the reflection, hissing and writhing. "Now the knife," Lorraine commanded. "Cut the air in front of the mirror." I raised the silver knife, my hands trembling, and sliced through the air. The moment the blade passed through the reflection, a piercing scream filled the room. The shadows exploded into a whirlwind of darkness, swirling around us. "Don't let go!" Lorraine screamed. "Keep the mirror steady!" The whirlwind grew more intense, and I could feel the pull of the darkness trying to drag us out of the circle. The little girl's face twisted in rage, her mouth opening impossibly wide to unleash another scream. The Shadow Man's form distorted, growing larger and more monstrous. But we held on. We held on for what felt like an eternity, until suddenly the darkness imploded, sucked into the mirror. The room went silent, the air grew warm again, and the stench of decay disappeared. The candles flickered out. Lorraine collapsed, exhausted. Jason and I stood there panting, clutching the mirror. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lorraine nodded weakly. "For now," she said, "but you need to be careful. The connection isn't entirely severed. You need to guard against their return." We thanked Lorraine and paid her, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She didn't think we were entirely safe, and neither did I. We've taken precautions, kept the mirror and the knife close, and performed cleansing rituals regularly. I haven't seen the Shadow Man or the little girl since that night, but I still feel like I'm being watched. I still hear whispers when I'm alone, and shadows seem to move just a little too much. I don't know if we truly succeeded or if they're just biding their time. All I know is I'm never touching a Ouija board again. If you value your sanity, neither should you. Stay safe, everyone. And if you ever see a shadow out of the corner of your eye, don't look, don't acknowledge it. Just keep moving. You never know what might be watching. I'm not sure how to begin this final update. Things have taken a turn for the worse, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on. If you're reading this, please learn from my mistakes. For a while, things seemed better. The rituals Lorraine taught us seemed to work. The whispers faded, the shadows receded, and I almost started to believe that life could go back to normal. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before they came back. It started with the dreams. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Images of the Shadow Man and the little girl burned into my mind. They were more vivid than ever, and I could feel their presence even when I was awake. Jason was experiencing the same thing. We kept in touch, trying to support each other, but it was clear we were both on edge. Then came the night I'll never forget. I was in bed, struggling to fall asleep, when I heard it, the scratching noise. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and more insistent. I sat up, my heart pounding, and saw the shadows on the walls start to shift and move. I grabbed the mirror and the silver knife. my only defences, and crept downstairs. The air was thick with tension, and the temperature plummeted as I approached the living room. That's when I saw them, the shadow man and the little girl, standing side by side, watching me. "Why won't you leave us alone?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty house. The little girl tilted her head, a twisted smile spreading across her decayed face. "You called us," she whispered. "We're here to stay." I held up the mirror, hoping to drive them back like before. But this time, it didn't work. They didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Instead, the shadow man began to move towards me, his long, bony fingers reaching out. Desperation took over. I slashed at the air with the silver knife, but it passed through him like smoke. The little girl's laughter filled the room, a sound that chilled me to my core. "Jason!" I screamed into the phone as I dialed him. "They're here! It's not working!" Jason's voice was frantic on the other end. "I'm coming over. Hold on, man." I backed into the corner, the mirror and knife useless in my hands. The shadow man's cold, empty eyes bore into me, and I felt a pressure on my chest, like an invisible hand squeezing the life out of me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Suddenly, Jason burst through the door, wielding a baseball bat wrapped in salt. He swung it at the shadow man, and to my shock, it actually had an effect. The shadow recoiled, hissing in pain. "Get away from him!" Jason yelled, swinging the bat again. The shadow man and the little girl retreated, their forms flickering and unstable. For a moment, I thought we might have a chance. But then, everything went dark. The lights flickered out, and an icy wind howled through the house. The shadows multiplied, surrounding us. I could barely see Jason through the darkness, his face a mask of fear and determination. "We have to finish this," he said, his voice shaking. "We have to send them back." I nodded, gripping the mirror and knife tightly. Lorraine had given us one last resort, a final ritual that could banish the spirits for good. It was dangerous and required both of us to be in sync, but it was our only hope. We stood back to back in the center of the room, the shadows closing in. Jason began the chant, and I followed, our voices merging into a single incantation. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows writhed in agony. The shadow man lunged at us, but Jason swung the bat, knocking him back. The little girl's scream pierced the air, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. The ritual had to be completed. As we chanted, the mirror in my hand began to glow, a blinding light emanating from its surface. The shadows recoiled, unable to withstand the intensity. I raised the mirror high, directing the light at the shadow man and the little girl. "Go back to where you came from," Jason shouted, his voice raw with desperation. With a final ear-splitting scream, the shadow man and the little girl dissolved into the darkness, the light from the mirror consuming them. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. The temperature returned to normal, and the shadows melted away. We stood there, gasping for breath, the mirror's light fading. It was over. They were gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a glimmer of hope. But the cost had been high. Jason and I were scarred, both physically and mentally. We knew we'd never be the same, but we were alive. We had survived. I haven't seen any signs of the spirits since that night. The house feels lighter, almost peaceful. Jason and I are still in touch, supporting each other as we try to rebuild our lives. Emily hasn't come back, and I don't blame her. She deserves a life free from this nightmare. If you've read this far, thank you, and please heed my warning. The supernatural is not something to be taken lightly. If you ever think about using a Ouija board, remember my story. Remember the horrors I faced. It's not worth it. You never know what you might awaken. Stay safe, and may you never encounter the darkness that almost consumed me.